I used to think insurance was a waste of time. People would tell me, oh, you got to get insurance because of this, because of that. And I never really understood how the health system works in New Zealand, the consequence for people's lives, and how likely it is that you're going to get some sort of ailment and the impact it has on your life. Like, I only just found out recently, let's say you got a mortgage, you got a family, and you can pay the mortgage now, but then you get cancer. And maybe they keep you on because they're really nice for 3 months. But it takes you years to actually heal, and you can't really get back, and eventually you got to replace you because that's business. And then, okay, well, at least the government will look after you. And you're used to a certain lifestyle because of the income that you've got, and that's how you could buy a house. And then suddenly you find out, oh, the sickness benefit, maybe it's around $300 to $400, and you might not even qualify for it if you've got 2 incomes. Now here you are, potentially dying, fired, no way to get a job, no way to fund your lifestyle. And what's the plan? And not only that, like if you want to get medication in New Zealand, we fund something like 30% of the life-saving medications. Whether it's longevity or whatever, maybe that number is not the greatest number to use, but basically we don't fund as many as the UK. They fund something like 80%. So imagine you go to a specialist, you got cancer, and they say this drug gives you a high probability of survival or gives you longer to survive. If you don't have insurance, maybe it's 60 grand, maybe it's 130 grand just for one treatment. And where are you going to get that from after you've lost your job, you've got all your money in a mortgage, and you're living off the sickness benefit? So not only does your care take longer, not only are you on the waiting list longer, because in New Zealand, even just to get urgent care, I was looking at the County Manukau website, to see a specialist referred from a doctor for urgent cardiology care, 5 weeks. And you think how that's extrapolated out in different avenues. So fundamentally, you've got to wait longer, you don't have access to the drugs that could save your life, and you're probably going to lose your house because you can't fund your lifestyle. So for a moment of time, insurance makes so much sense. And there's misconceptions and misunderstandings. So that's what this podcast is about, is to explain how it works so you can understand whether it's right for you.
One of the things coming in as an advisor and coming into my own business was having spent the better part of 10 years with advisors and their businesses at all stages. You understand what the pitfalls are, you understand what the potholes are going to be. And most people would think you would avoid those potholes. No, you don't avoid the potholes. But with knowledge, what you do is you climb out of that pothole faster to fall into the next one faster. And I guess that from that perspective, it helps. Is understanding the potholes that face you and how to get out of them, but also appreciate that most of the time you can't avoid them.
Yeah. What's the biggest potholes you reckon us advisors fall in? Well, I'm not an advisor anymore. Can't say us.
Well, for I think the biggest challenge generally in business is that first couple of years where you got to figure it out. You got to figure out what you're doing. You got to figure out who you are in this space. You got to figure out what your business is going to be doing and where it's going to go and what it's going to focus on. Because it's easy to say, hey, I'm, say, a life insurance advisor, and I'm going to sell life insurance. But who to? And I've found with my history and background and how I approach things, those that have got, those people who've got particular needs that aren't easily addressed is where I've excelled as an advisor. Whereas if you said, hey, I sell life insurance, yeah, it's pretty broad. And you're going to then find yourself in a position where you've got to cater to a whole lot of stuff, but exactly what is it you're doing? And how do you differentiate yourself from your competitor?
There was I can't remember the exact title, something like The Science of Advertising, and it was written like the 1900s, and it's still applicable. And it's like sell the service, not the product. So if someone comes in to buy a bike, you're like, oh, so what are you wanting to do? What are you trying to achieve? Like, where you want to go? Oh, I want to ride a bike through here, do this, do that. Instead of like, hey, what life insurance product do you want? So how do you approach
Correct.
that differently? Like, how do you go about selling insurance?
Well, I like to refer to myself as probably the worst life insurance salesperson around. Um, but somehow I've been pretty successful at it. And this comes back to, like you said, it's about selling the solution or the desired outcome rather than the product. So for my clients, broadly speaking, the process is, hey, tell me about your world, tell me about the problems in your world, tell me what problems you want me to solve. Plan. Now my camera's done something weird.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
It'll
that
continue on one track. It was fine.
yeah that issue we talked about earlier with the camera dropping out. That's what's happened.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, so it sits around understanding the client, who they are, where they are, what they're focused on, where they want to go, and what they want solved, and then finding the solution to the things they want solved. Now, part of that process you've got to understand as an advisor is there is an imbalance of knowledge and understanding. Okay, most clients who don't already have cover have an understanding from their great uncle's cousin's friend who had this really bad experience back in 1940. So there are some quite outdated views out there. And so as an advisor, you've got to understand that your client, when they state all of those things, there is a distinct element of they don't know what they don't know. And so as part of that process, is we've got to make sure we've covered off those holes. And that's part of the education and solutions provision in terms of what we do. The products are a tool, but ultimately for the majority of people out there, they want to live life with the security that if the wheels fall off, they're going to have the support. What that support looks like in terms of whose product, whose benefit, whatever, largely doesn't matter. Just so it's more that they've got the security that they're going to get the support they need when they need it.
Just on that, in terms of the call though, just before you go on that route.
Yeah.
So let's say you call or you Zoom, or do you do most of your business through call initially for the first appointment?
Actually, probably a good 90% of what we do now is Zoom based.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on the Zoom thing, like you're trying, they come on the call, you do, I don't know, maybe a bit of rapport building, but what leads you into the questions? Like, what are you sort of asking to dig into the problems and what they want in life?
90% of the time, it's just ask the question, okay, tell me about your world. And I've got, okay, with advisors, we've got needs analysis, we've got, or needs analysis fact find. So there's a bunch of tools we have around sort of what information we need to collect in terms of what we need to hit to be able to go, okay, well, we need this much cover of this and we need this sort of cover of that and which providers which and those things. But the I guess the big piece is when you start with a question of what's your world look like, they're going to start with the most important stuff for them. And if you get a client talking about themselves in terms of telling their story, you're going to get probably 80% of the information you need from that one question. Because
Makes sense.
it comes back to that old sales cliche of you've got one mouth and two ears for a reason. You've got to shut up and listen a whole lot more. So, yeah, if you're making or you're asking good open questions about the client to enable them to engage and develop that understanding with you, it becomes fairly straightforward to say, well, hey, I'm not overlaying my stuff here. I want to know your stuff so we can solve your problems. One of the other things too is from an advisor point of view, it's my job to get the answers for them and to lay out the options, but it's theirs to make the decision about what they want covered, what they want to do, and where they want to go. Because when I walk out the door or that meeting ends, I get on with my life. They've still got to live theirs. And there's a clear distinction with that. And I guess a lot of advisors will also face questions like, so what should I do? Now, what should I do should open up more questions, not provide closed answers. What should I do? Should I buy life cover? Well, you probably should, but what are you going to do with it? So you've got to get the client thinking. And once you get the client thinking and engaged in this process, they own the solutions you come up with. Now, if we go backtrack to 2020 when the world was falling apart and everybody was at home and money wasn't coming in and the rest of it, a lot of advisors were talking about clients cancelling cover because they couldn't pay for it. We had the opposite problem. We had clients calling us saying, hey, we can't afford it. How do we keep it? And that's the distinction between sales and advice. When you've got a client that's engaged in that purchasing process and they have made the decision to purchase rather than being sold, you're going to get a very different mix of decisions from a client, a very different mix of product as a result.
It's interesting. It's similar to motivational interviewing. It's like what psychologists use to convince someone, well, not ask a line of questioning that helps them realize their problem and then take meaningful actions to fix their addiction is what it was used for. And I find that
Yes.
in the same thing with kids or with leadership is like you're trying to ask questions that unravel the things that are holding them back and then getting mini commitments based on what they want, not what you're telling them. So how did you evolve into that? What did you always just ask questions and it became that way, or what brought you to this realization?
Well, given I came from an engineering background, we're talking, fairly sort of in the corner wallflower type approach to things, I guess. When I was working with Sovereign as a BDM, so there was quite a bit around the sales training and the presentation skills development, which has helped me immensely with my career. But I think ultimately there was the experience with working with advisors solving their problems. And then moving on, I was seconded to New Zealand Home Loans for 2 years. And I ran the risk operation of the business over there for a couple of years. And that was interesting because we were taking people off the street and effectively turning them into advisors. And that process was one that was very stringently managed in terms of the process. So much the same as what a bank today has to do with a nominated rep, or in the past with a QFE advisor, was we had a regimented approach to, okay, how is this presented? How is this put together? How is this advice compiled? And it was built round that consultative sales track rather than the traditional sales track. Because we're taking people off the street here. They don't have a sales background. They don't have particularly strong sales skills. And so we had to essentially build them up into somebody who was able to deliver a professional advice solution without necessarily having 20 years of skills behind it. And so with that highly structured approach to things, we were also able to deliver consistency out into our client base. And this was back in 2008, 2009, when the world was falling apart. And what we found was we were able to, again, deliver to the client base and increase retention of cover when the rest of the world was throwing it out because they couldn't afford it. And it fundamentally comes back to a single point, which is we've got to trust our clients that they're intelligent enough to make decisions for themselves. And an awful lot of advice processes and sales tracks don't put that into the equation. They assume that clients aren't going to make the right decisions. They assume that clients can't make the right decisions. And I think that's a pretty poor indictment on some of the attitudes that sit in that space.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something I'm struggling with. Like, if I let my mind go, I'd probably be a micromanaging, mistrusting sort of leader. And if the working on it part is like, instead of saying, hey, do this, it's more like, hey, here's the problem. How do you think we should solve it? Which is a tough
But
mindset flip, but you go.
yeah, well, it's doing that, but putting it in a framework that has boundaries. So you've got that safety, I guess, of what the limits are in terms of where you can go, but while you play in that box, you've got free reign. And so this was one of the key learnings out of this process was the New Zealand home loans process. When I went in there, was very much, here's the script, here's the process. Whereas what I did was unpack that and said, right, here's the framework, here's your process. But in terms of the scripted piece, no, we're going to back that off because we need to have the advisor's individual personality come into this. Because if you don't have the advisor's personality in that process, it's a sterile, robotic process. Clients don't engage with that. You've got to get that person back in that environment as well. Now, today, do I say the same thing at the same point all the way through every presentation? No. But again, that's part of that. You've got to have that really clear runway of what you're doing, how you do it, and why you do it, so that you can build the skills, you can build the experience to then allow people, once they've gained that, to then have more autonomy around how they personalize and deliver things. And that's just part of the growth process. You look at kids at school with art, you've got crayons and stick figures, and by the time they're getting out through the end of a year 12, year 13 art program, you've got stuff that's potentially some of the best in the world in terms of the quality of that artwork. Same thing with advice. You've got to start somewhere. And sometimes it's a pretty regimented stick figure process. But as that skill develops and that experience develops, you end up with something that then becomes really, really strong around that individual's delivery.
What have you found is quite helpful in the boundaries? What would you define as the right things to confine them to the point where they're aware of what they can play in but not going out of it? What's important in advice?
Well, with what we did at New Zealand Home Loans, at the time, New Zealand Home Loans only had Sovereign as a provider. So you only got one provider. And part of that was they only had to learn one product range. And so you could ease into that development process by understanding one product set, get your feet around that, and having an advice process that is really clear about how you come to the point of deciding how much life cover. So you have that as a more systemized calculation than a stick a finger in the air approach, which at the time a lot of advisors were still, if you ask them, they couldn't explain how they came up with the numbers. And so by essentially putting that framework in place around, well, here's the products, here's the numbers, and here's how you structure them. So I did a number of flowcharts around advice, which was things like ownership. Are we doing agreed value or indemnity value income protections? Do we have mortgage repayment insurance mixed in there? So there was flowcharts that I'd developed around that for the team to use in order to come to better decisions around product selection. Now, once you got your trainer wheels and you've got through that process a bit, then you can take the trainer wheels off and you can then look at, okay, how do we introduce other providers? Now, if you look at what's happened since sort of 2010 with the new legislation that came in then. A lot of the approach was to say, right, principals were bringing on associates, and the associate would get to work with one company to start with. So they were naturally taking the same approach in terms of building the knowledge and skill with a provider first, before you confuse them with the multitude of product options that are available and the different ways insurance companies process stuff. Quality product research. So Quote Monster, so one of our research houses, they did some analysis about 2013, 2014 from memory, and they came up with that of the products that they researched and provided in their research tools, there's over 25,000 different options in life insurance. Now, you can clear away a whole lot of those very simply. Okay, are you doing trauma cover standalone, or are you doing accelerated? Are you doing agreed value or a loss of earnings style product? Okay, once you made those sort of really coarse decisions, a whole lot of options do disappear. Right, but so the example on the trauma would be, if you selected a standalone trauma option, then life cover buyback is no longer an option to consider because it's not linked to the life cover. So therefore, if a trauma claim happens, it doesn't reduce the life cover like an accelerated product would. Make sense?
No. Can you try a different way?
Yeah, but so to briefly explain that one, because I appreciate some listeners won't have the knowledge.
Yeah. I'll do it for them, not because I didn't understand, obviously.
Yeah, accelerated or linked covers means that if there's a claim on that product, it has an impact on another product that's on the policy. So this is most often life insurance linked to trauma cover. So if you've got $1 million worth of trauma cover, $500,000 worth of $1 million worth of life cover, $500,000 worth of trauma cover, and it's linked or accelerated, then the trauma claim, when it's paid, you get the $500,000. It reduces the life cover by $500,000. So you'd have $500,000 of life cover left. A buyback option enables you to put the life cover back in place if you're still alive 12 months later. There is some criteria that's a little bit different across providers, but generally that's what happens. And so if it's standalone, you get the $500,000, but you still got the $1 million worth of life cover. There's no link, it hasn't impacted it, so you don't have to have the life cover buyback as an option. Yeah. So it's stuff like that in terms of product complexity that some of it disappears quite quickly when you have certain product selections.
Yeah, I was talking to an advisor, and he was exiting because he thinks the industry isn't as good as he hoped, because it's he feels like they should be experts in contract law, because essentially what you're doing is facilitating a contract on the expectation they'll pay out. How do you stay abroad? Because how do you stay educated? Because most advisors I talk to have to call some oracle of truth called an underwriter and be like, "Hey, what about this? What that?" How do you stay across it? Just do lots of policies?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because yes, that continuing professional development piece is a challenge. I guess I honed my skills with Sovereign and then with New Zealand Home Loans by focusing on delivery of underwriting and claims. Okay, I was 26 years old at the time, right? So what exactly is a 26-year-old BDM going to tell a 55-year-old advisor who's been doing it for 30 years? Probably not a lot. So I focused on, okay, how do I make his business go better? Well, we sort out underwriting and we manage claims in terms of take away those distractions. So I got involved in that. So I got a crash course in both claims management and underwriting. So I've got a really good understanding of that. As a result, and I'm one of the people that often gets called with questions by other advisors. I've got a database of I've got a policy library here that's over 25,000 documents. We have new stuff come into the market from the providers. We'll take the updates, we'll review them. We've got quality product research with with Quote Monster. So we've got that as a research house. We've also got Strategy Financial Services. Strategy's been around, over 20 years, maybe over 25 years doing research. So we've also got Strategy in the kit bag for research as well. So a whole lot of research sits around that. I run a underwriting database where we have medical conditions, and we're looking at, okay, here's a medical condition. What does each underwriter say about that medical condition? What sort of products can we do? What are the loadings? What are the exclusions? And we track that in terms of, okay, this one we might have seen in 2013, 2014. We've got another one on the desk today. Well, we've got a guide about what the providers used to look like. We'll then do the update on, okay, what's everybody looking like now? For something that maybe we saw 2021, real quick, okay, well, we know that Astron's good for life and trauma. We know Partners is good for disability and TPD. And we know that Southern Cross and NIB are good for the medical piece. Okay. That's a real world example of something we had come in 2021 that we had to look at the market for because of family history in that particular case.
Can you sort of explain, like, there seems this mystery and people won't know what underwriter is. So there's some person, some math whiz, like typing furious on a computer, or who's this person that says, hey, you can't get this cover because you got this illness, and what's their process to decide? And is there some sort of formula to it, a prediction?
Okay, so this is the piece that's fundamentally it's both misunderstood, but also highly automated. Okay, so I guess I haven't come across a underwriter who's a maths genius. Okay, underwriters generally are not mathematically orientated. Okay, yeah, the number of times I've pulled up underwriters on their math stuff because it didn't calculate is just about everywhere. Keep in mind, I trained as an electronics engineer originally, so maths was a significant part of my training from that perspective. So we've got actuaries who determine the rates on the covers. So how much what the premium is for the risks that we've got. The chief underwriter will work to negotiate the reinsurance contract in terms of what the relationship with the reinsurer is, how much they fund, but also, very importantly, the reinsurer will provide the underwriter or the insurance company a book, which is their underwriting terms and conditions. So this is where your loadings for conditions or your exclusions for conditions will primarily come from, is that the insurance company might want to take the risk on, but the reinsurer won't. And the reinsurer will then dictate through this book or this library of information what the terms and conditions are. So it all filters through that way. So the underwriter's job is half science, half art. So the science piece is, okay, here's the book, here's the cover, this is how much cover we've asked for. How does it sit within our retention in terms of, is this a cover that we're covering fully, or is it under reinsurance? Because if it's not under reinsurance, they can shuffle some stuff around. So most of the time, your medical covers are not necessarily reinsured. They're a self-insured book on the most part. But certain products out there, like mortgage repayment cover, so up to a $4,000 to $6,000 a month limit, the insurance company may retain that in-house, so they make their own decision on it, and there's no reinsurer involved. Okay, so when you drill down to products, there's different rules at different levels. So the underwriter's got to figure that piece out, which is the science piece. So that's the nuts and bolts, put the overlay, tick the boxes. Does it work? Does it not work? Then on top of that, the artwork piece comes in, which is the medical piece. And so what they're looking at is to say, okay, here's the medical information from the client. What does that look like in terms of risk? We know that they've had conditions in the past. Are they current conditions? Are they ongoing conditions? Are they resolved conditions? What's the reoccurrence of those conditions? So they've got to sift through all of that and make a call on a medical basis more so than a financial basis. Where we get into the financial piece is about, okay, does the income stack up in terms of the levels of income protection you've asked for? If we're talking about business assurance, do the financials in the company stack up against the financials that, the cover levels that have been asked for? So I'm finishing off a case at the moment for a company that's worth about $30 million. This company started at $5 or $6 million about 8 years ago, so it's had enormous growth financially. Now, six, 7 years ago, my challenge with them was financials to justify the level of cover we wanted, but also around the prospect of future insurability. So this is where on a business contract, you can increase the cover up to 5 times the original amount of cover just on financials. So it protects the client from having to fill in application forms and find themselves with loadings or exclusions or declines of cover later on because their health has conspired against them. And so the underwriter needs to be able to read some basic financials. They need to be able to obviously interrogate pay slips, do the math around that stuff in terms of the building blocks piece. But they don't have to be a math whiz as such. If anything, they need the medical knowledge and understanding more so than the math one.
Have you come across that guy? I can't remember his name, maybe Gary or something. He talks about how he can predict a person when they're going to die because he had all access to all these medical records as an insurance person. What do you like? Do you think they would have some level of unique insight, and then they should all become part-time dietitians, or what's some?
I won't name names, but we used to take the absolute mickey out of a particular underwriter who would disappear to the local fast food joint for lunch, and come back. They're skinny as a rake, and we would take the absolute mickey out of them about sitting in judgment of people all day and then disappearing out and having McDonald's. Look, we know what causes problems, and largely it's lifestyle. So it's lack of sleep, it's our diets, it is what we drink, what we smoke, and lack of exercise.
Yeah,
it's fairly straightforward. And can we predict when somebody's going to die off the back of that? I struggle. If you look back the last 20 years, look at the improvement of medical technology. It's been massive. Stuff that was a death sentence 20 years ago is basically take a pill on Friday and you'll be fine on Monday. We've had massive change with that sort of stuff, and there's more to come. I guess the key thing around that future prediction is assuming that the person that you're looking at is going to continue to do the same things they've been doing. And what I've seen in the last 3 or 4 years since COVID's hit is people are looking closer at what they're doing around their health, and they're doing more to improve their health and well-being than they would pre-COVID. So, yeah, I think the jury's out on predicting absolutely, because humans are intelligent and they will make choices.
it's going to be interesting. I think the value of an insurance or a financial advisor, I was going to say insurance broker, but you're advisors now.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting how you go.
Oh, yeah. The advisor broker thing is an interesting one. So a broker is defined as somebody who takes an application and puts it in front of more than 6 insurers. Well, we've only got 5 open for business life insurers. So you can't, by that definition, nobody's a broker. Yeah. So
fair.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting because I always worry that, your business is based on someone else paying you and you don't necessarily have the leverage, but then you look at the compliance risk for them to have their own advisors, and then you also look at how unhealthy people are getting from processed food, in my opinion. That's my...
Yep.
So then it becomes harder to find them. What do you think is so beneficial to insurers to have advisors do it for them, and why they haven't just, try to replace you?
Well, interestingly enough, this is a common debate. Insurers often look at the advisors and go, that's too risky. We're not going to put ourselves in that position because that's far too risky. Giving advice and making promises and all that other stuff that comes from the perception of the advice market. Whereas if you turn around to the advisors and say, hey, how about you make your own product? Well, most advisors will say, yeah, that seems like a reasonable idea, but the reality is I've got to put my own money up on paying these people if something goes wrong. Yeah, I don't like that risk. I'd rather somebody else had. So, yeah, there's a real yin and yang to that whole perspective.
It's reassured just with some person that has way more money than the insurance provider, so they partner with them, or what? Why do they need someone to reinsure?
What spreads the risk? So from a catastrophic risk perspective, it spreads that risk out. So you take an event like Christchurch in terms of the earthquake. If we'd had the deaths in Christchurch at the level we've seen overseas with earthquakes, that becomes untenable for a single insurer to be able to respond to that. That's why you have to have reinsurance. The second part is life insurance is an incredibly capital-intensive business. So we see policies have an average term of about 7 years. Now, life insurance businesses are structured around that policy being in place for 5 years to break even and 7 years to provide the profit margin they expected. And as a result, they're really capital intensive up front. So they do a whole lot of work up front, and then the money comes in over time. And so what happens with a reinsurer is a reinsurer will pay a commission to the insurer for placing that business. Now, that commission from the reinsurer is in lieu of the premiums that will come in. And so the capital comes from the reinsurer to pay the bills to set that policy up initially, for the money to then come in and be shared with the reinsurer ongoing. And so that's where advisor commissions come from as well.
From the reinsurer.
So the reinsurer pays the insurer then pays the introducing agent. But in saying that, clearly insurance companies have to have a level of operating capital. They've got to maintain a level of operating capital based on the size of their business as well. So partly the reinsurance piece is cash flow, partly it's about capital sustainability as well.
Is the financial rating that they have, or the likelihood that they'll pay out on claims, related in any way to the reinsurer? Like, obviously the claim rate, not so much, but the actual financial safety of it.
The financial strength ratings is an interesting one, because financial strength ratings look at the trading business itself. Is how likely is that business to fail over a period of time. I find the connection between financial strength rating and claims paying to be tenuous, because you could have an incredibly strong financial strength rating but still be absolutely horrible with claims in terms of how you administer them. Claims management has just as much to do with the money in the bank as it does with the attitude to pay claims. So there's a public perception that the financial strength rating correlates to claims payment. Largely, it doesn't. You can have somebody who's got an appalling financial strength rating, but they're actually probably the best in the market for paying claims. And they've got a poor financial strength rating because they're probably paying more claims than they should. So it's slightly counterintuitive in terms of that financial strength rating. So personally, I don't put a lot of stock in it for life insurance. For general insurance, and investments and mortgages? Yeah, absolutely. Because the strength of that individual company is critical to the operation of their products and services. So Fire in General will have reinsurance, no doubt about that. But they have to have, or they play in a space where they've got more capital on the ground to do what they do than what is necessary for a life insurance company to operate. And for investments, you're putting the money with them. You want to make sure you get your money back. For mortgages, you're getting money from them. You want to make sure that you're not going to be put in a position where you get that loan recalled suddenly without any options to be able to pay it back, in which case you lose your house or your business or whatever that happens to be. So, yeah, financial strength ratings across the industry are necessary, but in the life insurance space, I don't feel that they apply particularly well to the desired outcome that the consumer has.
And you talked about, educating to misconceptions. What's your take on when someone says to you, "Oh, yeah, insurance, they don't pay out"? What do you usually say, or what's the reason for sometimes they don't pay out?
So my answer to that is, if you look at the life insurance space, so exclude medical for a moment. So if we look at the life insurance space, somewhere between 92 and 93% of claims get paid. Okay, 7 to 8% of claims do not get paid. That's a very clear number. All the insurers will differ slightly around that. But roughly it breaks down into two areas that cause lack of claim payment. First one is non-disclosure. Is the life assured did not talk about the conditions they had and were asked for on the application, and the insurance company has subsequently either modified the terms, which is increased premium or apply exclusions, or they've cancelled the cover because the non-disclosure was so great. Now, that's a function of the application, and that's where insurance as a good faith contract is reliant on the clients disclosing what is asked for. When it comes to the other half, is we've got situations where what is claimed for is not covered. Now, that might be the client has an exclusion added to the policy that they had forgotten about or didn't understand, or it could be that it's something that's just not covered by that particular contract, i.e. they've got a life cover contract. This one's a good example from the past. They've got a life cover contract, they've been disabled, and they put a claim in for disability insurance. While it was talked about in the advice conversation they had with their advisor at the time, they didn't take income protection. They only took life cover. And so we've got a claim decline because it doesn't cover what the client was claiming for, because the client didn't buy the benefit. So that whole understanding piece becomes incredibly important when it comes to these sorts of situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You go.
Personally, last 5 years, we've been tracking what we do with claims. And last year alone, we're over $3 million worth of claims paid across 292 claims, I think it was. So a lot of claims last year. And we had less than 1% decline. So, yeah, from that point of view, do insurance companies not pay? Yeah, that happens. But the vast majority of cases, they get paid without question.
Do you think, because people talk to me, we buy it online, it's cheap as chips, it doesn't take this long, you're making me do all this stuff. I know, there's things like, medically underwriting things and how that impacts claims. So what's your perception of people just being like, I'll get the cheapest thing online and just click?
Yeah,
no medicals.
Good luck. So, in terms of no medicals, you're only really talking life insurance products. And those life insurance products with no medicals are largely funeral type plans. So they're designed to be, you don't get cover for a couple of years. It's only accident-based cover until then. And they charge you a substantially higher premium for the amount of cover that you've actually got. So that whole, I can get it better, cheaper online. Yeah, not so much. And the other challenge is if you're buying the stuff online and you're not involving an advisor to help guide you through the process, 9 times out of 10, you're going to miss something with your disclosure. You're going to find yourself in the non-disclosure decline claim camp because you didn't answer the questions that were asked.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
It's just the way you described it, 25,000 different options, and so it can be quite overwhelming and confusing to people. And yeah,
Yep.
it's an interesting feel, and it seems quite human heavy. It seems to be quite inefficient. What have you found is quite helpful, either in prioritizing a claim or setting up the application the right way to ensure that there's better claim rates, or what's the process you go through to ensure the 1%?
So it's well, it all starts at the advice process. So it's about getting the right products implemented in the right way. So I guess the key thing there is not about how much cover you want, but what claim do you want paid, and how do we make sure that claim gets paid? So, for income, let's say it's income protection. I want my income to come in. Okay, well, we need to make sure we've got proof of your income so we can get agreed value, so that you've got certainty that that level of income is going to be provided to you. We've got to get the disclosures around your occupation, your financial situation, and your medical situation really clear so we don't have any surprises at claim time. I often will say to my clients, when it comes to paperwork, I'm going to be a pain in the ass. I'm going to be a pain in the ass to you about your disclosure to make sure you get it right. I'm going to be a pain in the ass to the insurer to give us the best terms. And what's interesting is even there's a perception out there, the more I put on the application form, the worse my terms are going to be. Not the case. Put on the application form what is asked for. And if you've got something to say on the application, make sure you can tell a story about it. Tell us the story about what happened to your left ankle 9.5 years ago. Because that story is going to help the underwriter understand what's going on. The underwriter is going to know, hey, you had a left ankle injury 9.5 years ago. You had some physio on it. You didn't participate in sport for 6 months, but you worked through. You fly a desk most of the time, and you haven't had any issues since. Cool. For the underwriter, they're going to look at that and go, yeah, that's an issue resolved. There was nothing really major with it. Needed some physio at the time. Looks to be soft tissue. No exclusion. Whereas if you said, hey, I hurt my ankle, my left ankle, and 9.5 years ago, and don't say anything else, the underwriter's got to assume that it's still a problem. You're going to get an exclusion. So it's about making sure we've got that scope around that disclosure to provide the underwriter the best understanding of that client situation that's possible. So the story I often trot out around this is I had a client 10, 12 years ago now, and I sat down and they had cancer, heart, knee, and something else excluded on their Southern Cross policy. They'd gone back to Southern Cross to go, hey, I don't think these exclusions are fair, take them away. Southern Cross said, no, we're not doing that. And I sat down with it and I went through it with the client. And I couldn't understand why they had a cardiac and cancer exclusion other than there was some family history. Now, today, Southern Cross doesn't ask about family history. So I'm going, that makes no sense to me. Let's have a go at it. Now, this client not only filled in the application form, ticked every single box, filled in every extension page. We had about another 6 or 7 pages added to the application form in terms of disclosure and 150 pages of medical notes, right? And we're applying for medical insurance, okay? Most advisors look at that and go, too hard, we're going to get millions of exclusions, don't bother. But because we went through that process to explain all of the bits and pieces and we had the medical notes and all the other bits and pieces, put it to the underwriter went through it. And we came out with cover that has a left knee exclusion because they actually had surgery. Everything else had happened and been resolved. That client ended up with cover for cancer and heart conditions on that new policy that we put in place. So a hell of a process for the disclosure. Most advisors would go too hard.
Is there an efficient way to get those disclosures? Like, are you just hitting up some doctor with like all these notes in a folder, and then they got to scan it and send it to you? Like, what's it actually?
So in those cases, we ask the client to go to their doctor and get it. 9 times out of 10, the practice manager pushes print on the client file, prints it out, and hands it over. Yeah. The largest set of medical notes for underwriting I've had was 400 pages.
How do you do that on Zoom? Are you just like, I just hold it up. I got it.
No, they've got to get it to me. They've got to send it to me.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So it's very human heavy. Is there any ways, like, if you could wave a magic wand and change everything in the medical system and make the perfect application process, what would you?
I would have the ministry around financial services and privacy reverse the 2009 Privacy Commissioner statement that insurance companies cannot ask for medical notes unless they have a specific request. So one of the things going through FSLAP when we were looking at the current legislation and in its consultation phase was MP Chris Farfoy said he was banging away on Fair Go one night saying insurance companies need to be requesting medical notes and getting full medical notes for a client to ensure that the client's not putting themselves in a non-disclosure position. Yeah. I had the opportunity to sit down with Chris Farfoy about 3 or 4 weeks later, and I pointed out, the Privacy Commissioner in 2009 said the insurance companies cannot do that. So if you want them to do that, you're going to need to change the rules. Now, if we've got quick, efficient, cost-effective ways of the insurance company accessing medical notes, most application forms would 3 or 4 pages, not 40. Because your client can go through, well, hey, I've had these conditions. This is where they sit in terms of providing the current view from the client's perspective, supported by their medical history. Because the issue is the insurance company is going to ask for the medical history when there's a claim. So if there's anything in those medical notes that's going to be a problem because the doctor's misfiled something, which happens, or the doctor's written something that's completely off ball, we can deal with that at underwriting. We can manage that at underwriting. The client can go and talk to their doctor about, hey, this needs fixing or this needs correcting or whatever. And so then we can have that conversation at underwriting when there isn't a claim at risk, when the underwriter can assess it based on the picture, rather than at claim time where it's now, oh, we've got a claim and potentially you're getting a bias because there is a claim. So, yeah.
That's wild. Because you think like, that's wild because you just cut out for a bit there. I just thought I'd jump. But like, yeah, that's what everyone. So the perception of advice is not valuable, it's free. That's the market, in my opinion, until you actually go through and show it. And then the amount of effort you go in, and then you also got to convince them to do it. And then you got to get them to do more work in order to do right by them. How do you, is it all just because you've asked the right questions in the advice process, or how do you get over that?
So from what I've seen and what I've worked through, from start to finish, if we exclude travel time, okay, from start to finish, from when you get the first inquiry from a client to when you get completed, finalized policy in place for that review, right? That's 12 to 13 hours of work for the typical advisor. Now, how do we manage that? We automate the crap out of what we can automate. So we have advice systems that help us with producing reports. We have research tools that help us isolate down the research picture for what we need off the back of those advice tools. And so we get into a position where we're able to then look at the market quite effectively. Now, keeping in mind, I work with every single provider in the market. whereas a lot of advisors will only work with 2 or 3. So I'm adding to my burden, so to speak, because we've got such a wide spectrum on providers. But at the same time, we're in the position to look at something that's already in place and take over servicing and look after it. Somebody comes to us and says, hey, I've got an old resolution life policy. And we look at it and go, yeah, and we can't do much about it. You've got to hold on to it. But we can then look at modern products to fill the gaps with other providers, and we can have the whole lot work together. So that's, I guess, part of the strength of what we do with working with all providers. But the workload around that comparison and advice piece is much, much higher.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, very in depth, and you just finished a podcast. So thank you for sharing all your knowledge.